Welcome to Vertical City. I'm your host, Lennon Richardson. During each episode, I interview one of the world's top experts in architecture, urban design, engineering, or ecology so that we can better understand and develop solutions for sustainable living. Thank you for listening, and get ready to join us on another groundbreaking and uplifting episode. Sonja Trauss is the head of San Francisco Bay Area Renters Federation, or SFBARF for short. SFBARF promotes the development of market-rate housing in order to increase the overall housing supply and resolve San Francisco's housing crisis. Sonja has a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Temple University, another degree from the University of Pennsylvania in mathematics, and a master's in economics from Washington University in St. Louis. After receiving her master's degree, she taught math at a prep high school in Oakland, California, before becoming the principal of SFBARF. In this interview, we discussed the causes behind San Francisco's housing shortage, which have led to the highest housing costs in the nation. We examine what's needed to rectify this situation and the present circumstances that are preventing the solutions from being implemented. We also discuss many other housing and development-related issues around the world. Visit our website, verticalcity.org/podcast, for complete show notes and links pertaining everything Sonja and I discussed today. Sonja, welcome to the Vertical City podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. I want to start just by kind of getting a feel for the situation in San Francisco at the moment. I've heard that San Francisco historically has always been one of the more expensive places to live in the U.S. and in fact around the world. But recently I read something that said that San Francisco has the highest housing costs in the nation. Do you feel that that's primarily caused by a lack of housing?
Yeah, I mean, a combination of lack of housing and also high wages. So it's not just that there's a lot of people that want to live here and work here, but also we have high wage jobs.
Okay, and so because people can afford more, then that's going to drive prices up?
Yeah, basically. I mean, when, it's the combination, right? Like as long as there's a shortage, people don't have a lot of choices. And so landlords can ask for kind of anything. Now, in other situations, prices are capped by salaries. If our main industry was meatpacking or baking, those are very low profit margin industries, and wages would just cap what people could pay, and what you would see instead was a lot of crowding, which we also have actually.
So obviously not everybody is in the tech industry though in San Francisco. What about people who are in the baking industry? How is the housing situation for them?
I mean, it's terrible. Like the way I mentioned baking because I did actually used to work at a bakery. Okay. And I mean, that's made possible by a few things. One, crowding. Two, I mean, you can get together $2,000 a month to pay for a one bedroom if 4 or 5 people live there. Another thing is we do still have some kind of low price areas, like West Oakland was pretty low priced, and Bayview. Also, rent control for people who've already been here for a long time. That makes it possible for low-wage workers to live in San Francisco. And then public housing, like real public housing, stuff owned by the Public Housing Authority. Because unfortunately, a lot of the below market rate units that are created by inclusionary zoning are actually very expensive. And that's not, like, you wouldn't make enough working in the lowest paid jobs to be able to live in the inclusionary housing.
What is inclusionary housing?
Inclusionary housing is housing that's created basically by inclusionary zoning. So cities in California and starting in other places have started to try to promote economic diversity and the creation of low-income housing by requiring that developers set aside 8% or 12% or 20% of the new building at, below market rate prices that are determined by the city law.
Oh, okay.
But that winds up being like housing for middle income people, and it's not real low-income housing, like the way Housing Authority housing would be, or Section 8.
Okay, so when you're using low-income housing, you just mean that by market forces, it's just available at a lower cost. And then when you're referring to public housing, you mean something that's dictated by the government, that the prices have to be lower. Is that correct?
Yeah, and subsidized.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. I think eventually I'm going to make like some kind of chart or something, right? Because there's all these names like subsidized, affordable, below market rate, public housing, and they all kind of mean slightly different things. But yeah, I mean, I think the most confusing term is quote unquote affordable housing, because that doesn't, I mean, any housing that's occupied is affordable to whoever lives there. I mean, it's sort of a meaningless word.
Right. That's actually something I wanted to ask you later is how do you define affordable housing? It sounds like you're saying it's not based on a certain price limit, but it is actually relative to income.
Yeah, absolutely. It's relative to income. It's relative to what you want to achieve with your particular program. You know, that's why I feel like it's a lot clearer to say something straightforward like below market rate housing. And the truth is, I mean, in San Francisco or anywhere where your market prices are incredibly high, below market rate housing is still very high, right? All it has to be is below market rate. It doesn't mean it's cheap. It doesn't mean that it's affordable to someone who makes a minimum wage job, for instance. So, you know, it's more specific. Like you might want to say something like subsidized housing. And then it's like very straightforward. What you mean is that there's a cost of either producing the housing or maintaining it. And the people that live in it pay part of the cost. And then either the government or a philanthropic organization pays the rest. But yeah, the thing is with housing, when you're running a city, you really do need enough housing that everyone that works there has somewhere that they can stay. Or even people that don't work there. I mean, you know, there is always a place to subsidize housing for people who are like old or can't work. So, yeah, I mean, that's what you need. You need to make sure that you have enough to go around. That's kind of what we're focused on is addressing the shortage. So, you know, having enough to go around is not actually necessarily going to solve your problem, but your problem can never be solved if you don't have enough to go around. Because, yes, that's it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do you have any indication of how much of a shortage there is? How many more houses or dwelling places does San Francisco Bay Area need?
There's a lot of different estimates. My favorite way of thinking about it is one of the people on my mailing list pointed this out, that the Bay Area is something like 0.5% of the world economy. Okay. And so that means that we should expect 40 million people to live there. Instead, 7 million people live there. So
you guys are pumping on a lot of economy.
Right. I mean, California itself is like the 7th. If it was a country, it would be the 7th biggest economy on its own.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I think there's something about that I like. I feel like 40 million, especially if we're thinking over the next 100 or 150 years, that's the kind of megapolis that we should be imagining, especially considering that, you know, in the next, I don't know, whatever, you probably know better, but in the coming decades, we're going to have something outrageous like 2/3 of the world's population living in cities. You know, and in other places, we already have cities. Cities already exist that are 20 million people or more.
Sure.
That's not common in the United States, but I don't see why it shouldn't be. So that's one kind of long-term goal way of thinking about it. The way that I like to think about it is that up until the 30 years before 1970, so 1940 to 1970, the amount of housing in the Bay Area doubled. But then in the next 30 years, the amount of housing in the Bay Area only went up by 30%.
Wow. So, and how about population during that time?
Well, population is somewhat constrained by how much housing you have, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So population is actually really a function of housing, and it's a function of housing and crowding. So the population increase is not exactly the right number because what winds up happening is people who would live in San Francisco or want to live in San Francisco should be able to, just don't. You know, and they don't show up in a measure of population increase. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, the value of the economy has gone up, right? That's another way of kind of thinking about it. Like, if you have so many high wage jobs, then that's a way of sort of having a proxy for how many people want to live somewhere, how many people you would expect would want to live somewhere. So it's about, I think I should have done the math actually before I came on, but that would be, I think it's something around another like 2 million homes in the Bay Area, or 3. Yeah, you know what? I think it's 3.5 million if we had kept growing, if we kept doubling.
I see.
No, it's 2 million. It's 2 million.
Okay. From 1970, you mean? From 1970?
Yeah. Wait, actually, so right now we have 3.5 million about homes in the Bay Area.
Okay.
And so we would have like 5.5.
So 2 million more.
If we had increased, but I should just do the numbers. Sorry. If we had doubled instead of increasing by 30%, which is a lot, but there's other estimates that we should, be twice as many. One interpretation of one of the legislative analyst reports on the subject suggests that it might be 4 times as many houses. So it's really hard to know. And at the same time, I feel like it kind of doesn't really matter, because the truth is, there's no such thing as overbuilding. I feel like there's no downside of accidentally building too much housing. Too much housing is really, as a renter, our goal. We want landlords to be the ones that are sweating, not renters. We want landlords to be worried that they're not going to be able to fill their apartment, and we want them to interview us, not the other way around. So that's why, I feel like any new house you build reduces displacement by however many people live in it. So there's no downside to just continuing to build until it's very clear that we have way too much.
So is this a problem that's predominantly affecting people of lower income, or is this affecting people of higher incomes as well?
Well, that's what's so incredible about now. Yeah, that it's affecting people of very high incomes. So Palo Alto recently was considering giving housing subsidy to people making less than $250,000 a year.
Amazing.
Which is outrageous. Yeah. So that's one reason why I think, SFBARF and the YIMBY movement is suddenly possible. Look, it's not news that poor people have a hard time affording housing or affording anything. Poor people are in a constant housing crisis. And I hate to say it, the truth is though, people don't care that much that poor people are in crisis. If we cared about that, we would fix it. It's now middle class people consider themselves, upper middle class, that are also in crisis, that it's suddenly a national issue. Hopefully it being a national issue will bring solutions, all down the line. And absolutely, I think that just a generalized building program does bring solutions for everyone. It'll make everybody's situation better.
Okay. So what type of housing do you see is most needed in San Francisco? Should they be developing housing for every income spectrum, or should they focus in on one area and then that'll kind of relieve the pressure on the others?
Well, the thing is with housing is that housing, the income of the future residents is not actually an attribute of the housing itself. So I think that San Francisco should be focusing on high density housing, right? It's crazy for San Francisco to build anything lower than 4 stories, really. Everything should be 5 stories. If possible, we should be building, as many high rises as we can. It's going to be, it's like I said before, it's the demand and the salaries of people demanding it that determine, what the price of the housing is. Because we have a lot of existing housing that was built for, in Palo Alto, the Eichlers, that was built for the middle working class kind of people, but now they're extremely expensive. And that's because of the situation, surrounding the housing. So it's all, I have no problem, obviously, building, subsidized housing. The question is where the subsidy comes from. I don't have an opinion about that. I feel like there's 2 sort of separate political projects. One political project, the one that I'm doing that I'm really interested in, is upzoning, making it legal to build higher density housing, and entitlement reform, making it cheap and not risky from the point of view, of the city process to build a lot of housing. Now, separately, there are other people that are interested in raising money to subsidize housing. And that's great. Like, I mean, honestly, like, they could subsidize 100% of the housing, or they could subsidize 5% of it. That's not, like, I'm delegating that. My job is, like, making it cheap to build, making it possible to build high. As far as who pays for it and who winds up living in it, I'm neutral. Because that's what I mean. Like, yeah, like, building a lot isn't the only thing, but nothing else is going to work. So I feel like I want to say, step one, my job is to see 10,000 units built every single year. How do we do that? Step two, if people want to distribute it some various ways, I don't actually care.
Okay. So how many houses are currently being developed, or how many were developed within the last year or the last 5 years as an average?
It went up. I think last year was like 4,500 homes. The year before was something similar, like 4,000. Let's see, really, actual 5 years ago, 2011 was like the worst year in recent memory at less than 300.
Less than 300 homes? Wow.
Or, apartments or anything.
Sure.
Yeah, because it was the bottom of market.
Right.
2011 is really where, like, there were actually, the market crashed in 2008, but there was a lot of, when your stuff that was halfway finished had to be finished. So 2008, 2009, 2010, the amount of projects went down, but it was 2011 that you really saw the effects of, the 2008 crash, which makes sense because it takes about 2 years to actually build something. And anything that wasn't already broken ground just didn't get started.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, since the 90s, the average is like a little more than 1,000 units a year, maybe 1,500 units a year. So it would make it, you can imagine, like, what if San Francisco actually built 5,000 units a year for 4 years in a row? It's actually a very modest goal. But it would be so completely different than anything we've done for 25 years that I can't imagine that it wouldn't make a pretty big impact. So that's kind of, it's, there's, these numbers seem kind of crazy, right? 40 million people in the Bay Area, but I actually think like a pretty modest, sustained increase in the amount of, units per year would make actually a very noticeable difference.
So what do you think is needed? You mentioned 10,000, you mentioned 5,000. What should they be striving for?
We should be striving for everyone who has a piece of land and an idea and realistic financing to be able to build it. That's what we should strive. It's a process goal.
Okay.
And that way, if we have that all over the Bay Area, we can rely on people to just do it because the incentive is there. We don't have to cajole people into building things. They want to build. It's the localities and the neighbors that say no. So if we can turn all those no's into yeses, then all over the Bay, all kinds of housing is going to be built. That's kind of what I'm really excited about. Like, I love the idea of giving people free reign, because in some areas, especially if we really let people, landowners have all kinds of ideas that they've been nursing for, years about what they want to build. I would like to see what they come up with.
All right. So you mentioned the neighbors, and this is what's preventing some of these developments from taking place. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. If you live in a neighborhood, especially if you own your home, but honestly, a lot of renters that feel secure are like this too. The truth is, if you already have a home, new homes don't do you any good at all, right? All they do is, make traffic, get in the way. Maybe they're going to be building the new homes on a lot that you've been using as a dog run, something like that. And actually building houses is a really classic concentrated harm, distributed benefits problem. So ordinarily when a locality is making a decision, increase sales tax by 0.5%, all the parties that are affected know about it and they all have the opportunity to lobby their representatives and write op-eds and, be part of the decision-making process. But when you're proposing building a new, 50-unit development on some empty lot, the really only the people that are harmed, only the immediate neighbors really know about it. The people that eventually benefit, the 130 people that will live there when it first opens, and then the thousands of people that will live there over the life of the building, don't exist yet. Like they don't have any opportunity to come and speak for themselves. And so that's why, as long as I hate to say it sounds nice to have community control, but you can see the result of community control in the Bay Area. We tried it. We had a good run, 40 years. As you would expect, it just results in underbuilding because the people who benefit from building are distributed, and they exist in the future, or they exist, they still live in some other part of the Bay Area, or they live in some other part of the U.S., and they don't know that they should be weighing in. So that's why I started the SF Bay Area Renters Federation, actually, like as just a bunch of unassociated renters, like kind of almost randomly going to speak in favor of any project as proxies, because we'll have like 3 neighbors be like, don't build this. You're going to have to cut down trees to build it. And then we would go and testify, and we'd say, okay, there's 3 neighbors here opposed, but like, think of the 130 people who would live in it. Imagine all those people here. All of them are in favor.
Mm-hmm. I see. So is that how things are really being prevented? There's a hearing of sorts, and some neighbors are going and testifying?
Yep, that's it. These decisions are made project by project, one by one. Every single week, the Planning Commission in San Francisco, they hear projects. I mean, honestly, by the time a project gets to the Planning Commission, then it's not that likely that it'll be turned down. But that's because developers are in contact with oppositional neighbors, ahead of time. And most of the time, developers won't bring something if they know it's going to be turned down. But the thing that winds up showing up at the Planning Commission is frequently not the thing that was initially proposed. It's, smaller. And, I mean, there are projects that just never make it to the Planning Commission. There's actually a lot of projects on hold now that aren't going because the developer is afraid that if they go, too many neighbors will show up and oppose it, and they don't really know what to do.
So what do you feel is the solution? Is it a change in legislation, or is it a process of educating the populace?
Yeah, I mean, both. Change in legislation can't really happen until people, I guess, are educated. It's definitely, I think that there's, my instinct when I started the Renters Federation, and I turned out to be right, is that there are a lot of people out there that actually believe we should be building more, but they're not organized. We're all unaffiliated. We're kind of all in our own worlds. So yes, step one is getting organized, like getting ourselves all on one mailing list, and also showing that political support for building does exist. And that's one of the things that's been so effective about just going to Planning Commission meetings, because just having, like, it would be me and 2 other people, if that. Sometimes there'd be 1 other person, sometimes there'd be 4 other people, but to have us just kind of show up and check in and like let everyone know in person that there are people in San Francisco that want to see more building happen, I think has been pretty emboldening already for our local elected officials. And it just sort of changes the whole spirit of the thing. Like, it also really helps the planning commissioners, because the commissioners, a lot of times they want to say yes, but if there's 12 people that testify against it and they all say no, there's no one there saying yes, it's kind of hard for them. They'll be like, how about a continuance, developer? Maybe you guys can work this out in 60 days. But if there's 12 people against and 3 people for, it's not even. We're not the majority. But just being there allows the planning commissioners to be like, okay, great. We've heard from both sides. These people want one thing. These other people want another thing. Everybody has good points. Here's my decision. So, yeah, that's definitely something that, like, people can do on their own. Is like check in, just make sure that you are a physical presence in your community and at your neighborhood association meetings, saying that you do think that a development is a good idea. And then, the second step, now that I think that we've shown that there are people out there and we have a mailing list, and I'm still always, getting more signups, is actually organizing as a voting bloc. So that's what we're doing this spring. There's an election in San Francisco. And it's the June 7th, like, primary election, but in San Francisco, you can vote basically all month, the whole month of May at City Hall. So we're trying to get all the YIMBY voters, like Yes in My Backyard, to come vote on May 10th. And that's going to show how many of us there are. And it's a very low turnout election. So we're aiming for 2,000 people, which is going to be a lot of people. It's like not a lot of people in the sense that it's definitely an achievable goal. I think inside our networks we have that. But it's going to be enough people that the local, like, political scene will take notice. And it'll be a show of strength. And that's really, after that, we can start getting the people that we want elected. We can start sort of bullying elected officials and getting them to pass laws that we want. But yeah, ultimately, it's going to be legislation change.
All right, so you just used the term YIMBY, which I've never heard before. I've heard NIMBY, Not in My Backyard, before. And I also read that term on your blog as well. I'm wondering if you can just kind of briefly define what those terms mean for listeners who maybe don't know, and then how those relate to the conversation we're having.
Yeah, I mean, NIMBYs, that's this classic, right? Not in my backyard. And their swan song is, I'm not against development, but, and of course, they've never been in favor of any development, but now that there's going to be a development near them, they have a whole bunch of concerns. And that's basically, the neighbors that are, it's not like I blame them. They don't benefit directly. So, so YIMBY is just sort of the opposite. Yes, in my backyard. It's somebody that, like, for whatever reason, thinks building is a good idea. And there's a lot of different paths, to being a YIMBY. Some people were urban studies majors or design majors, and they believe in density and they have a vision for, like, a beautiful city. Some people are anarchists or libertarians. They just don't believe in zoning because they don't think that that's the kind of law that government should make. For me, I like building because I think that we need to increase capacity. I think that San Francisco and all these big cities are places where people can come, they can, have access to high-paying jobs that they don't have at home, and also access to cultural diversity and cultural acceptance that they might not have at home. And I think my grandparents were refugees. Like, it's totally strange to me to think that, you shouldn't try to make room for people who are trying, to settle where you live. But basically, it's just anybody that's cheerful about building and wants to see how they can help.
Okay. So you've mentioned high density a couple of times, and I would like for you to just give me your thoughts about why you feel it's important that any new developments that are taking place be of a larger nature.
Because, why have sprawl? We shouldn't be using agricultural land or land that's actually completely wild for housing. We have a lot of land that's already built out. It's already kind of spoiled. We might as well use it more intensely. It's not necessarily that the new projects have to be big, right? If you have a small lot, then you can have a small but high density project.
Yeah.
I guess I just want to say that. I do think that they should be densely used if that's what your local economy supports. It's efficient. It's efficient, like, for transportation costs. It's efficient for all kinds of infrastructure costs. It's more efficient water-wise. It's easier to support lots of retail when you have high density. But yeah, a big thing is that it's an anti-sprawl kind of policy.
Okay, well, that's something we definitely resonate with here at our organization. So you also mentioned getting greater use out of some of these areas that are already developed. Do you mean that they should be tearing down old buildings and building newer, more high-density buildings, or are there areas that need to be developed or that can currently be developed that are basically being unused at the moment?
Yeah, well, we still do have brownfields, right? Like former industrial sites. In San Francisco, we have those all over the country. We have those. Those are great. Things that, office parks, was really popular, but now office parks aren't that popular. Malls was a really popular way of using space. I mean, Walmart is closing thousands of Walmarts all over the country. So there's a lot of, I mean, it happens all the time. You know, you do something, it's a good idea for a while, then it's not a good idea anymore. As far as lower density residential, I mean, I certainly, like the worst thing to tear down are like 2 and 4 unit apartment buildings, because that is naturally occurring, you know, low income housing. And there's a lot of, we don't need to tear those down. You know, like they are relatively low density, but there's tons of other like unused non-residential space that we can tear down long before those. Because that, you know, that's where this is where like the tenants' rights movement overlaps with anti-development, is when you, like traditionally, I mean, it's a lot easier normally to build new residential in an area that's already residentially zoned. You know, one thing that San Francisco has kind of done right is rezoned formerly non-residential areas, finally. But, you know, at first that wasn't really the case. So at first you had low-income renters getting basically bulldozed because the owner of because, you know, property values went up, demand went up, and the owner of their unit was like, I'm going to tear down this 4-unit thing, build an 8-unit thing, right? Mm-hmm. But that displaces people. So it's not worth it, especially, like I said, when we have many other better options. Another option I love, this is why what's happening, or what almost sort of happened in Seattle, was so incredible. I feel like the gold standard for development without displacement is allowing single-family homeowners to tear down their own houses and build 4, 8, or 12-unit apartments, if that's what they want to do. Because the great thing about that is, like, literally no one loses. The only downside is a change in neighborhood character. But neighborhood character is, like, arbitrary and aesthetic and completely, it's not a strong enough desire to make serious public policy based on. Yeah, because if you're a single-family homeowner, you know, you use your house, your kids moved away, you don't need it for that anymore, tear it down and build, like, you know, 8 units or whatever, and you make room for 12 people to live there, you're richer than you would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
And no one's displaced. I mean, it's awesome.
So that happens.
That's the dream.
That does happen sometimes?
Rarely.
Yeah.
Rarely. It's a struggle. You know, I mean, it happens in areas that aren't single family zoned. You know, I mean, that's what Seattle was trying to do, is that there was this proposal to have none of the city, you know, remove all the single family zoning. And that would allow people to do that if they wanted. And if they don't, that's the thing. If you own your like, single family neighborhoods are overwhelmingly owner occupied. And so it's the kind of thing that, like, only gives people options. You know what I mean? It doesn't make anyone do anything. And that's my favorite type of policy.
Yeah. All right. So I know that there's also currently a dialogue that's taking place about the Balboa Reservoir area, which is a 17-acre site that's owned by the city, and they're contemplating developing it. What are some of the proposals that are being put forth, and what do you think? How do you think it should personally be developed?
It's the proposal right now. It's not clear. It looks like it'll be between 500 and 1,000 units, but probably much closer to 500. You know, it'll have open space, retail, all that stuff that, like, a big development needs. The problem is, so that's actually kind of a weird location. It's super well served by transit. It's across the street from the community college main campus. So there's a lot of traffic, you know, a lot of activity. But on one side, there's, like, 5-story apartment buildings, which is fine. It's, I guess, dense enough. And then on the other side is single-family homes. So this big, huge lot, which should actually be, I think, you know, 12 or 16, at least a couple 12 or 16-story buildings, because it is so big, you know, you could comfortably put those there, is instead, hopefully there'll be 5-story buildings like the one, like on the one side. But I'm afraid, you know, there are neighbors that want it to just be single-family houses. There are neighbors that want it to be a park. It's currently a parking lot there's a lot of people that are just like, why can't we just keep it as a parking lot? So it's kind of a testament to, it's typical. Like, of course, we're in such a terrible situation when even now, even when we're clearly starving for housing, and this is such a prime opportunity to build something that really has a lot of capacity, it's like pulling teeth. And there's so many people around there who just absolutely have no motivation, and they cannot understand why they should care at all. I mean, literally, like, I've talked to neighbors around there, and I'm like, don't you care about, like, displacement? Doesn't that, you see in the newspaper, people's lives are being uprooted. And some of them have the attitude like, well, it's hard to live here. You know, if you can't make it, you don't deserve to live here. It's ugly.
So it sounds like you said they're thinking about building something that's more about 5 stories, and you would like something that's at least double that to be able to house twice as many people. But you did also mention that this is an area that is already high, has a lot of traffic. If you were to develop something much larger and denser there, wouldn't that just increase the traffic problems?
I mean, maybe. I mean, the traffic there is really bad. You know, it's the kind of place that's bumper to bumper, you know, from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. So I don't know how much worse it could get. I mean, honestly, there's not really any reason why anyone living there should have a car. I wouldn't. I feel like traffic is the kind of thing, I mean, traffic engineers can make it better, and traffic engineers definitely should. Again, it's about delegation, right? There's one side of it, which is like providing the political activity and movement to get all this stuff built. Then there are traffic engineers that should decide how best to manage traffic. I don't think increasing traffic should ever be a reason to not build something, you know? I mean, we have all made decisions about how to transport ourselves based on wanting to avoid traffic. And if traffic is bad, people will decide to avoid it. And if people, you know, the kind of people who have to drive, they do exist. There's no reason they would live around there right now. It's already so bad. I mean, you know, they just wouldn't live there. But there's lots of people that don't have cars and don't need them and don't want them. I guarantee there are plenty. There's 3,000 people that don't have cars and don't need them who would be happy to live there. So that's why I'm not worried about traffic.
All right. So that area has the community college, and so I imagine that a lot of the traffic would be from students who are commuting to school. I wonder, though, is San Francisco, the Bay Area, is the public transportation system as a whole, is it sufficient enough to support students who would be traveling from somewhere that's not so close to there but need to go there for school? Is public transportation good enough, or do they have to drive?
I mean, the point is that traffic's already so bad that anyone deciding to drive, like, it's not going to be any better or worse. You know, they've already decided that it's worth it to them. The question is, I mean, the new people there, I wouldn't necessarily expect them to make more traffic because given that the area around there is congested, I don't expect them to have cars. The other thing is that there's nothing that can help you get better transportation more than having more people demanding it. So yes, San Francisco has not been spending enough on public transportation. Again, this is not my issue. I don't know why public transit riders aren't more active. And I don't deal with traffic. I just don't. So, but if I did, you better believe I would be organizing to get it taken care of. I trust people to do that. And that's kind of how I feel. Like, the fact that there are people who can't get it together to organize, to demand better public transportation, that should not stop us from building housing that other people need. You know? That's a terrible reason to not build housing. Building more housing only will add to the political pressure to fix transportation problems.
Okay, so I want to take this conversation back to a little bit more of a general place. And if we are able to increase the amount of housing that's available throughout the San Francisco Bay Area, in addition to potentially lowering costs, what other benefits would you see realized?
Well, it increases access. That's my main thing. You know, we do have a lot of high-wage jobs here, and there is, I mean, San Francisco still really is a place where it's safe to be weird in a lot of different ways. It's still a mecca for, gay youth. I have a friend from Philadelphia that I ran into here who had transitioned from a woman to a man. I mean, he's a man now. And I was like, oh my God, why'd you move here? And he said, because I wanted to transition. It wasn't even for a job, right? It was just because he knew that, like, this is a place that there's a lot of transgender people. And so it's a safe place for that. And he didn't feel like Philadelphia was going to be the right place for that. Like, and then not to mention, I mean, once you're here, I mean, the nice thing about density and a big population is whatever thing you're interested in, whether it's as a hobby or for work, you can find people that care about it. In your small town, like your affection for 17th century stringer instruments, you might not be able to find other people that are interested in that.
Yeah, that's what's great about cities.
Yeah. So I just can't understand why San Francisco is, the old guard is so committed. I mean, they really do seem committed to like a more provincial version of San Francisco. And, there are remote, lonely backwaters all over the U.S. That's not rare. But what is rare and special, I think, is having a really diverse, a diverse, vibrant place with a lot of people with a lot of interest.
Okay, and earlier in our conversation, you had mentioned some areas of San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland, and I can't remember a couple others that are more low income than others. Is segregation a pretty significant issue in San Francisco currently?
I would say so. I mean, San Francisco proper is 30% Chinese, and I think 15% Hispanic, and then like 4% Black, and then the rest white.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing more segregated, than a city that like literally just almost does not have a certain type of person in it, And so, and I mean, between the Chinese and white population, there's some segregation just because a lot of the Chinese are actually recent immigrants. Like they only speak Chinese. So but for English speaking Chinese people, I think it is pretty integrated. But yeah, I mean, we have the same problems with segregation as like any American city. I mean, just like every other American city after World War II, the SHA insured loans for white people, but not for Black people. So our suburbs, we have a bunch of white flight suburbs in the East Bay, like outside of Oakland, and in the South Bay that were built in the 50s and 60s, because of these FHA loans. But segregation is actually that's the bright, like that's the thing that's getting better. I mean, gentrification for all its problems is actually integration. So the segregation is going to be going down, I think. It's still segregation is worse now in the U.S. than it was in 1945, but the worst it ever was in like 1990, and the U.S. since 1990 the U.S. is becoming more integrated. We're still not as integrated as we were in 1945, though, but we're getting there.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And so, do you see an increase in housing being able to further this trend of integration?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because look, the most dense cities that I've ever been in, I mean, are also the most integrated cities. Like when you make a lot of room, then you never know who's going to show up there. And I think that that's one of the advantages of density, is that you create the opportunity, the possibility for all kinds of people to be able to live very near each other.
And currently in the San Francisco Bay Area, how many people are left out? How many people are not able to find houses at all and end up homeless?
Oh, homelessness? I don't know. I think we have 6,000 or something homeless people in San Francisco. Yeah, I think it's something like that, 6,400, a little more than 6,000, which I can't tell if that sounds like a lot or not. Sometimes it doesn't sound like as many. Sometimes I think it's lower than I would have expected. But, it's certainly a lot of people. I mean,
yeah.
Obviously it's a lot of people.
Yeah, as you mentioned that, my initial reaction was, oh, that doesn't sound like very many. But then my second thought was, wait a minute, that's 6,000 people. I mean, that's a lot of people, right? That's
right.
That's a lot of people. I mean, maybe as a percentage of the whole population, it doesn't sound like very much, but that's definitely a lot of people who should have homes who don't.
Yeah, because also, I mean, homelessness, that doesn't count. Obviously, that doesn't count all the people who left. Right, I think most people, when faced with homelessness in the Bay Area, would just leave. Right, 50,000 people leave every year, San Francisco.
Really?
Some of those people, yeah, and so some of those people maybe wanted to leave, or maybe some of them died, but we really don't know. I think it's reasonable to guess that at least 30,000 of them didn't want to leave. We ran out of room, so what are you going to do? So they move. Who knows where they move, honestly. And then you can't.
They moved to
tell.
Portland. A lot of them do.
Right. Well, that's where they're coming.
Yeah.
But then there's another kind of runoff, which is kind of like me. I didn't move to the Bay Area to move to West Oakland. I moved to live in San Francisco, but San Francisco was full, so I live in West Oakland instead. And West Oakland is basically San Francisco. It's fine. But how many people were thinking of either moving to San Francisco or Seattle, San Francisco or Portland,
right.
San Francisco or staying in their hometown, and then they wind up in one of these other places. So the overflow from San Francisco is, it's very hard to measure. That's why I kind of like this idea of, the 40 million people, which is proportional to our role in the global economy. That's, to me, that's for the whole Bay Area. But I think that's one of the only ways to start to think about the whole number of people who maybe would live in San Francisco if they could.
All right, so we've covered a lot of different topics here related to housing in San Francisco. I'm curious if there's anything that's really near and dear to your heart that we haven't had a chance to address yet.
Well, I guess I just want to say, as far as your future city stuff, I know that the kinds of things that you're thinking about have definitely been some of the things that have inspired me. Part of what makes it easy to be enthusiastic about this all the time is, a vision of the future perfect city, and the idea of being able to have a whole city in a high rise really is incredible. And it's something that I would love to see. And one of the things that's so frustrating about some of the parts of the way that we do development now is that for whatever reason, a very highly valued attribute of a new development is how well it matches the existing development. I don't know why that should be a value. There's a lot of old buildings that have a lot of really great attributes, but that doesn't mean that since they were built, we as humans haven't thought of or invented or imagined better things. San Francisco is really forward thinking and really visionary in a lot of ways. We should be able to be a place that revisions what high-rise living, what high-density living could look like. But so far we haven't.
Yeah, I've spoken to many different architects on this podcast, and they often have brought up the notion of building the new building or whatever the structure might be to fit its environment. And I think that there is some validity to that, but it sounds like you're saying that in some cases you feel that that's maybe not the case and that you should just be able to look at the building in isolation, or are you suggesting something else?
There's a difference between fitting the environment and matching the other buildings.
Okay.
Fitting the environment is much broader. That's kind of what I imagine, when people are designing tattoos, right? A good tattoo understands that it's not going on a flat piece of paper, and the picture should be something that makes sense on a rounded surface. So that's what fitting the environment to me is about. But matching the environment would mean not getting a tattoo at all. You know what I mean? Matching the environment is normally what happens. It means that you just build a building and you make sure that it's the same color as the thing next to it. And that's not necessary. And also, more importantly, there are, like, for instance, the worst thing about high-rises as we build them now is that we build them as gated communities. But we don't have to, you know? Like, that's one of the great things about having retail, about having a truly mixed-use building, is that you can create new homes that are multi-story. But if you built it right, people could, like, retain a sense of privacy and security while also having a building that allows the public to move through it. And because I do think it's harmful to the fabric of a city to build a gated community. And I mean, even in my own life, canvassing is very difficult in these new high-rise condo buildings. So, I mean, that's just a very specific, concrete example of how they, like, canvassing, having somebody knock on your door and want to talk to you about the election. That's a really ancient way of, like, being connected to your community. These high-rise buildings that are cut off, but it's not necessary. It's just a way that we think about how we're supposed to build condo buildings. So it's stuff like that I think is a shame.
Okay, so if you look forward to the future, maybe 10 or 20 years from now, what's your vision for San Francisco?
10 or 20 years from now, I mean, you know, hopefully we get a lot of stuff built out. It would be wonderful, like I said, for some of it to you know, radically challenge our understanding of of built space. But for the most part, it's going to be a lot of, you know, 5-story apartment buildings, but that's fine. Hopefully we will be able to build through the next crash. I don't know what that's going to take exactly, but I would love to have, like, a steady 3,000 to 5,000 units a year for, like, 10 years. And hopefully, like, prices will flatten a little bit. Maybe it'll be like Seattle. I mean, which is, you know, expensive, but not as expensive. Mm-hmm. Pretty modest vision, honestly.
Okay. Well, it's pretty, I think, reasonable, though. Well, Sonja, this has been a really great and informative interview. I thank you so much for joining me. We have just a couple of minutes left, and so with these last few minutes, I'm curious if there's any specific call to action or anything like that you would like to make to our listeners in support of your vision.
Yeah, call to action. If you really do want to see, so San Francisco right now doesn't actually have a pro-building, you know, party or anything like that. But I really do want to show that there is a pro-building movement in San Francisco. So that would mean voting on May 10th. So go to sfyimby.org, and that'll have the slate, and it has some more information about May 10th. But put it on your calendar, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I mean, you can come anytime at City Hall and come check us out, because that's really the gold standard. Like, if we can get our 2,000 votes, it's going to be a lot easier to get legislative changes going. And some of the legislative changes are, like, for instance, the Affordable Housing Bonus Program, which is a real upzoning. And it's an upzoning of the West Side, which has been historically impossible to do. We'd like to have that happen for us finally this year. So if you want to upzone the West Side, help show that pro-building political movement is possible.
Great. Well, give us that web address one more time.
sfyimby.org.
Okay.
sfyimby.org.
So SFYIMBY?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you again for joining me on the Vertical City podcast. It's excellent. And for our listeners, you can get complete show notes and links to everything else we've discussed by visiting verticalcity.org/podcast. Sonja, thank you again for joining me, and I wish you the best. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Vertical City. Learn more about the Vertical City concept and continue the conversation by visiting our website, verticalcity.org. I truly hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe to our podcast, leave a review on iTunes, and most importantly, share Vertical City with your friends and colleagues so that together we can create solutions for sustainable living. I'm Lennon Richardson, signing off for the Vertical City team. See you next time.